So Bizzie, we were just talking about how veterans could potentially, and you probably have the data on this, be predisposed to suffering from PTSD. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, so what is it? There's something in the body and the brain. What is that?
So one of the things that we've done for the last 11 years is map the input-output relationships between childhood environment and inputs to outcomes in our everyday adult life through behavior, patterns of thought, patterns of decision-making. And what we've found is that there are actually only 5 brain pattern types that you can spread across the whole population. So think about how unique we all feel. There's basically 5 versions of us. And there are subtypes within the 5, but essentially all of humanity gets distilled to 5 brain pattern types, and there are only 2 that are actually predisposed to PTSD. Okay, so technically, you can screen for something like that. And this is why not all veterans get PTSD, or some veterans, and I'm sure many of you have worked with them before. I know I've worked with them before. They'll maybe have the physical symptoms of PTSD, right? So maybe their behavior, they get more easily agitated, or they kind of go into that sort of fight response where they want to manage distance, but there isn't the visual stimulus tied to it, right? That there isn't the nightmares. They're not losing track of time and space and getting lost in their thoughts. They just really have the physical fight response activated.
That's my brain type.
Okay. Right. So that's a very specific brain pattern type that these types that most people would identify as PTSD do not have. So you would not fall into that category.
Interesting.
So let's explain, if you would, what is a brain pattern type?
Makes a lot of sense.
Great question.
Yeah.
So a brain pattern type tracks 9 different markers that are going to help explain your thought process. So the thought process is going to start with an initial perception of reality. So it'll give us a snapshot of what assumption would you, Justin, make if you were just observing any situation with people in it, without people in it. That gives us marker number 1. Marker number 2 tells us, what are you going to do with that information? Because as soon as we look and we've made an assumption, our brain's going to constrain our choices, and it's going to only select something that doesn't negate the previous one. Our brain thinks very formulaically. And I think people really miss that when they look at something like what I do, and they're like, well, what about feeling? What about creativity? I'm creative. Are you creative?
Yeah.
I still think formulaically. My brain still functions like a computer, right? So we have the ability to be creative and expressive and all these things, but at the core of what we do and how we operate, we function like a computer. So what ends up happening is, as soon as I say, this is a safe environment, my brain has now maybe opened up the possibilities that I think I have in this situation. I can ask Justin a question. I can, tell you a story. But if I get into this room and immediately I've decided you're unsafe because you're muscular, or you're unsafe because you're not smiling, what am I going to do? I'm going to do this, right? So that's totally person dependent. Somebody can sit in this room with you guys and be like, you guys are a blast. You're awesome. I feel so comfortable. Someone else could sit here, be scanning your body language and be like, I didn't like them at all.
Yeah.
So is this something
totally
that
subjective?
Is it a genetic, or is it something like you said, maybe genetic and experiences? Or
so genetics are always going to give you a predisposition. But here's an example. If you grew up in a family where for generations there was yelling and aggression and harsh forms of discipline, are you coded genetically with that? Of course, but it's a predisposition. It doesn't guarantee that you will express it, right? That's what the whole field of epigenetics essentially has shown us, is that it loads the gun but doesn't pull a trigger. So there still has to be a trigger pull in the environment, and there has to be some sort of conscious process by which you actually go through and decide how you're going to handle it. So that's the second marker, right? Is not how am I seeing the world, but what am I going to choose to do about what I've just decided to observe in my reality.
Sure.
Then we move into another layer. So for us, those would be the most thought-based or immaterial layers. So the things that you can't readily observe in the naked eye. Then you go one layer below, which is 3 different markers. And these actually help us understand your emotional addiction cycle. So if you've ever experienced an emotion, right? Think like fear or anger. Typically there's some subtle physical signs with it. And for some people, it's more than subtle, right?
Yeah.
Some people like lunge, their face gets red. But at least for most of us, anxiety is a great example. You can't always tell when somebody's anxious, right? Some people are good at masking it, but they can likely feel it. Oh, my heart rate went up. Oh, like for me, I start cracking my neck, right? There's subtle physical signs at a minimum. So that's that liminal space where it's crossing from like the immaterial thought world or consciousness into the physical. There's chemicals involved. There's muscle tightness involved. Maybe heart rate is going up. So we track those 3 markers next. And then at the very bottom, we have 4 other markers that actually track our physical behaviors and how our decisions actually will then further influence behavior. And these 4 markers actually track our cascading behaviors because we actually all behave in cycles that are very much patterned. So most people, if I were to do this 20-minute brain pattern mapping session with them, I can accurately predict how you would handle virtually any situation to the point where most people sit back and they're like, all right, I'm really freaked out right now. Are you a witch? Are you a wizard? Like, what's happening? I actually had this like high-level Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur click on one of our ads, and he ended up doing a session with somebody else, and they were like, Bizzie, I think you need to talk to this guy. And I was like, sure, whatever, because I don't usually do the brain pattern mapping sessions at this point in my career. So they passed me to him, and he sits there and he like gets right up in the screen. Am I allowed to swear on this show?
Yeah.
Okay, so he like gets right up in the screen. He goes, seriously, Bizzie, what the fuck is this shit? What is this shit? And he's like freaking out. He's definitely from the Middle East somewhere. And he was like, I can't understand. He's like, you realize this is a fucking $1 billion company, $1 billion. And he was like, who's your investor? And I was like, we're not going to go there right now. Sir, do you need help? Like, is there something I can do to help
I knew you were going to react like this.
Totally. Well, and one of the markers that we track is that he's impulsive with his speech, and he talks before he thinks, only so that later on he'll reflect back on it with shame. Oh, I overdid it. I spoke out of turn. So these are things that we can track. And again, this goes back to this brain pattern mapping. These things aren't random. Like for me and my pattern, highly observant, notice patterns. I'm much more likely to pull back and observe quietly and then speak. So it's very rare that I get myself into trouble using my voice. In fact, a lot of people, I think, conflate certain emotions with certain behaviors inaccurately. So an example would be what we've found is often when people think, oh, you're really angry, that's actually somebody's fear. And then, for example, with me, my anger is very quiet. It's all up here. And I'm figuring out how I'm going to really...
How is it going to manifest?
Yeah. What am I going to do next that's going to make you really regret ever crossing me? But I'll be super calm, quiet, collected. And obviously that's not the case for everybody. So one of the things that we also do with these 9 markers is we actually track pattern oscillations. So we can tell you if something's going to be overactive and then move to underactive. If it's going to be the reverse, you start underactive, then you move to overactive, or we also have something called a pattern reversal. So in certain circumstances, you might be overactive in a relationship setting, but then you're underactive in career. So all of these things we can predict in 20 minutes, and it usually scares the crap out of people. But I think the most important part about this is that most people spend, 5, 10, I know people have spent 20 years in therapy, right? Where that they're not a therapist anymore.
Yeah.
They're a friend. They're I don't even know what you want to call them, emotional pincushion. That's no longer an effective dose. Whatever was happening at that level, that's not effective anymore. And what we find often is that when people get to break, they'll say, you know what? I actually think this is the first time I've ever made that connection. And we've been on the session for like 20 minutes. Why doesn't everybody know about this? Why did I just waste 10 years in therapy? Because if we can know everything about how your brain tricks you into screwing yourself, then we can fix it. It's that simple.
I'm doing it.
Yeah. This is going to be an incredible podcast.
I'll do it for you. I will come out of my retirement cave to do that for you.
Oh, how cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to know how fucked up my brain is.
That one thing to mention is we actually are all fucked up.
Yeah.
That's the key piece, right?
That's the coolest part.
In our society, we put labels on people. Oh, bipolar, borderline. Those are all brain pattern types. Literally. They're all brain pattern types.
Yeah.
And it's a brain pattern type blended with how quickly somebody speaks without a filter or not. And sometimes somebody could have the same brain pattern type and just their communication filter is what gets them diagnosed as a schizophrenic or not. It can be that simple of a nuance. And this kind of, to bring it back to the question about PTSD, veterans that have one of two brain pattern types, so 2 out of the 5, but more importantly, the markers down on that very physical level that show the cascading behaviors, right? So their step sequence, they build on each other. We know exactly what 2 markers in that cascading behavior sequence will actually cause PTSD. So they can be isolated.
So this is going to be a phenomenal podcast. Bizzie Gold, thank you so much for being here. If you guys have not heard of her yet, she is, read a quick bio here, regarded as one of the top personal development and wellness experts in the world. You're the host of a top-rated podcast called The Modern Good, where you do a lot of things around mental health and sociological issues and motivation and all that. Man, you also have, you've built a lot of brands from what I understand, and do something called the Break Method, which is kind of emotional rewiring, if we will. I think we're going to get into that for sure. But we're super pumped to have you here because both of us are veterans. We've both, known some people that are not with us anymore, personally and, professionally. And, I have a lot of stats here ready to pull up if needed, just about mental health. Especially when it comes to men and veterans and certain demographics that are really struggling. And so, we kick this thing off talking about PTSD. And I think I'm hoping this is going to be a reassuring podcast for a lot of guys to listen to that, like, yes, your brain might have a miswire or something going on, but everybody does.
Everybody. And literally everybody.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that like you can't be fixed. It doesn't mean that you have to, there's be some questions I'm going to assume a little bit here, but it doesn't mean you have to live with it forever, because there's different ways that we can kind of trick the brain because the brain's always tricking us. So I really appreciate you coming all the way out here to speak with us today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm fascinated. Like this is like 100% my wheelhouse of interest. So yeah. So let me hit you with my first big question that I prepared for you.
Ooh, okay. That one wasn't big to start off with.
Well, that was a great one. Yeah.
Jeez. All right.
Well, it's actually a very simple question, but I'm very curious in the answer. Like what is mental illness? What is happening in the brain to say that somebody is suffering from a mental illness?
Mental illness from a sociological perspective is a label alone. Yeah. I don't think it's real. I know we were talking before about how we all have a brain pattern type, and then that brain pattern type, essentially when you pair it with all these other markers, will end up determining how we express ourselves and really whether society would label that borderline PTSD, right? They're all just labels. So what I have found to be true and time again is that people that get mental health labels or are described as mentally ill in some way are no different than 70-80% of my other clients who think that they're totally fine. So once you actually get in there and you look under the hood, I mean, do you know how many people, and obviously I'm just going to say I am not a therapist, so I'm being expressed through a totally different lens. I work more with the data side of it. There's so many clients that I have that would fit the classical diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. They have no idea. They would just keep going on with their lives, no idea. And can I tell you, it's so much more common in men than we think it is. I see it all the time. And there are very specific childhood inputs that are responsible for it, which I would love to get into in this episode, because I know you did ask about the role genetics plays, because genetics, in my opinion, is so much less powerful than your childhood environment. Your childhood environment every single time will overcome what's in your genetics. Yeah, let's get into that. Because I have a 6-year-old at home, little daughter. And, I'm very careful. My wife and I are very careful about everything that she sees, hears, and does. We send her to a private Christian school, and we're just really trying to be mindful of, what her little brain is consuming. So I'd love to hear, what a childhood correlates to later on in life, so we can kind of help, give her what she needs. But, everyone has a different upbringing, and I'm always amazed by someone that could be raised with a very difficult upbringing, without parents or very abusive parents or whatever, and they get to a certain point in life. Or then other people who have great parents, have lots of money, lots of perceived love and all this kind of stuff, they go the other route. And you're literally right over the target zone, right there. The reality, and this is from studying the data for 11 years, there is a certain level of trauma and hardship that is required for a positive outcome. if things are easy and your parents are too kind and too soft and helicopter you and prevent you from ever having to face the world, your outcome is far worse. I tell this all the time to my clients that are overdoing it with homeschool and attachment parenting and just trying to be so loving all the time. You are setting your kid up for a nightmare of a life. Those are all the clients that I have, right? One of the gifts that I have in my career is I get to work with all the generations, right? So I have like the 70 and 80-year-olds that are like, better live 5 years if that's all I make it free than like spend another 5 years sitting here doing nothing with my life. So I get like the older generations. And then I get the like 40, 50, 60s. And then I have kids as young as, I literally have like behavior strategy clients that I write for their families that are like 2, 3, and 4. So I've literally had everything. I've worked in a therapeutic boarding school for teen girls that were suicidal, homicidal, all the things, gender dysphoria. So I've worked with all these generations. So the cool thing is you have to track the data through all the generations. So I can also see all the generational trends. So when we look at like our grandparents' generation, like, yeah, they were tougher and their outcomes were better because their lives were shittier in a variety of ways, right? But it made them tougher. Did you guys ever see the Dollar Shave Club for Men? You know, where he's like, you know, Grantler, whatever, it was like Pop-Up didn't have that. And he's like, looking good, Pop-Up. Like, you know, they didn't have shit. And they were tough, emotionally resilient. A lot of them built businesses. They saved money, right? They became structured because they had to survive. Yeah. When we do the opposite and we overdo it with the structure and we're super kind and compassionate all the time and we overgive, we actually decrease our children's ability to self-regulate. We decrease their self-efficacy, right? They become dependent on us to do things. So they don't actually learn to struggle or to think strategically on their own. And that sets kids up for failure. So from working with all these generations, what I've found, unfortunately, is, right, you get these like 60 to 80-year-olds where the brain pattern type skewed much more abandonment oriented, where you naturally have a distrust for other people, but have a high level of self-trust, which of course is going to generate a better outcome. Then it shifted where once we started to coddle a little bit more, I think a lot of the shift that I noticed was around kind of the 90s, where you stopped legally being able to be raised by your neighborhood, right? Where it was kind of like, leave, don't come back till the sun comes down. That became kind of illegal, really, like in the 90s. That like all of a sudden you could get in trouble with CPS for like
they stopped
neglecting
spanking,
your kids,
they
right?
stopped all that.
So what ends up happening is then naturally two things happen. The parents kind of have to coddle more and do more. But also another thing that I think happened is a lot of us were able to escape our parents' emotional dysfunction because we were out in the neighborhood. We're like, cool, mom and dad don't have it together. I'm going to go hang out with friends all the time. And, you know, like I grew up in Manhattan, and I mean, looking back on, I wouldn't let my kids do this. I have 4 kids for what it's worth. And I was like 13, 14, 15 out in New York City at raves all night, talking to homeless people outside by Grand Central Station, waiting for the last train home. And my parents had no idea where I was. But, you know, thank God I didn't die. But also it made me a badass, and it made me able to, all those skills help me be able to do what I do. So I think it's important that we remember that there is this shift where now a lot of the clients that I work with that are in their teens, like in this therapeutic boarding school, a lot of their parents were doting. A lot of them came from super wealthy families, had their life handed to them on a silver platter. And what do? They are obsessed with content consumption. They're addicted to social media. They start cutting when they're 11, right? What ends up happening is they become so addicted to external validation and feedback. They have no self-trust whatsoever. They have no self-efficacy, all learned helplessness. So they give away all their authority and power to all the content they're consuming, which from a conspiratorial perspective, I think is 100% exactly the plan. So it's basically taken this whole current generation and just thrown them in the gutter, really.
So I'm the oldest, I think, of 12 cousins, I believe. I'm 41. I lost a girl cousin of mine, a younger one, probably, I'm bad with timelines, probably about 5 years ago or so. But she came from, you know, a family that basically gave her anything and everything, you know, just had lots of money, had everything that they wanted to do. I don't exactly know what happened, but I know that she took her own life, and it's kind of a shock, growing up having anything and everything you wanted. But it makes sense what you're saying. So my question would be like, what advice do you give parents who are together, who have their shit together and have kids and can give them a very easy life, give them lots of love, give them everything they need? Like, what kind of induced hardship, if you will, or what kind of advice do you give them so they don't be raised having it too easy?
Great question. And this is part of our teaching and break method, and we just call it the parenting keystones. So to me, there's a hierarchy, and in the very first position is age appropriate truth. No matter what, it's like a hands down age appropriate truth has to be in the top spot. So I like to use this example to get it across people, because I think it feels kind of subjective, but the way I'm describing it, it's really not. So let's use an example of a family where a child was very close with an uncle that has committed suicide, right? Think about what certain families might do. Maybe say, oh, he's too young, he won't understand, I don't want to tell him. Maybe you tell some like alternate version, or you just like avoid it. Yeah, right? He went on a trip. I had a friend at Jewish sleepaway camp who told me her dad was on vacation for 2 years, and I had to be like, I don't know how to tell you this.
Oh boy.
He has to be in prison. I was like, I don't, maybe it's just me, but I'm pretty sure he's in prison. She's like, no, mom said he's on vacation. So this is a great example of what not to do, right? So let's use this example where, let's say the child is 7, uncle has committed suicide. What's not age appropriate truth is, Mommy, how did Uncle Sam die? Well, honey, he grabbed a gun, he blew his brains out, and there's brains splattered all over right? That's not age appropriate truth.
Right.
Maybe that's factually true. That's too much. That's too much. The child doesn't need that. What's too little is, he's just going to go away for a while. I don't think we're going to see him for a while, but I'll let you know if we hear from him.
Yeah. No, total lie.
Total lie.
Yeah.
But really, there's so many things in between that are still also not good. So kind of this key place we have to hit is, the truth is, Uncle Sam is dead. Mommy, what does death mean? And right there, that's why most people are like, I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Okay. So one of the most important things that we have to remember is that many of our beliefs are formed from gaps in understanding. And I think a lot of people miss this. When a child doesn't know how to fill in the gaps, what are they going to do?
Now they're going to go to social media.
They're going to go to social media, but still the human reflex is assume, try to figure it out on your own, right? Piece together what you already know, which might be limited. But also keep in mind, it's based on your childhood perspective. So now we've got a 7-year-old that's going to decide something that will affect them until they're 70. Yeah. And then it goes into your subconscious. So even if a person learns that's not true at 30, their body is still going to keep acting as if that 7-year-old message is true. So we have to do better with filling in the gaps and not being afraid of but why, Justin? Why? Because if we don't answer it or we start to push back, either our kid's going to stop trusting us if we just cut them off and we're like, stop asking questions.
Yeah, I love when my daughter asks why.
I was about to say that too.
I'll give you one example. I mentioned it on another podcast before, but she knows the concept of good guys and bad guys. We won't let her watch TV if it's something super gory or something crazy, but like if it's an action movie, like whatever, she can sit there and watch it. The other day she asked me, so where do bad guys come from? Because in her mind, the concept is like, those are just, I don't know what they are. Like there's mommy and daddy and Adam and all these people, and they're the good guys. And sometimes there's bad guys. Where do they come from? Well, I let her know that like, well, those are people just like us who have decided to be bad people for some reason. And we don't know if someone is good or bad around us, which is why you need to stay close with mommy and daddy and Uncle Adam and all this. And, we just don't know. And that's why we're always nice to people and, went on this kind of thing. But you should see her face when she went, oh man, there are people just like this, like that. Because in her mind, I can identify a bad guy. And when I told her that you necessarily couldn't, it was kind of like this thing, but I didn't want to like sugarcoat her and just be like, oh, that's, they're fake. They're in the movies. Daddy's a good guy, but she's starting to ask those questions and fill in the gaps. And I'd love that you said this.
That was the exact right thing to do.
Okay.
Because you give her, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but we need our kids to not blanket trust adults. That is one of the biggest fails I think that we've done in our society. So what you've done is you've introduced a healthy level of mistrust of other, right? Like you can trust mommy, daddy, Adam, but we don't always know when somebody's bad. And then, okay, well, how do we know, dad, right? So then you're showing her there's a solution so that she isn't afraid, but that she's also not willingly just going to go in and trust everybody. Right. Because what ends up happening is that pattern type that has more negative outcomes, and not just negative outcomes in terms of what their behavior looks like, but more important, how they feel about their own life. Because that's an important distinction I want to make, is what I'm also basing that on is how somebody would self-report their quality of life, right? Yeah. So somebody could have a life where it's like life is really hard, but they're like, I mean, technically things suck, but like, I feel really good. I care more about that than the person who looks like they have it all on paper, but is struggling with suicidal ideation, intrusive thoughts, and they're just always stuck in their head. They'll report a low quality of life, even if they're a multimillionaire, have the hottest wife, etc. Yeah. So outcome, I'm thinking also self-reported quality of life, just to kind of keep that marker out there. So when we're talking about the way you did it for your daughter, you introduce this idea that you shouldn't trust everybody and that there are bad people, which without the solutions-oriented piece could put a child into fear. But frankly, better that than like, oh, that's just in the movies. You don't have to worry about that. And like everything where we live is sugar-coated, because that's going to set a kid up to go out into the real world and find very quickly that that's a lie. And they don't know how to navigate that because they haven't been taught any self-efficacy, and they haven't been taught the skills on how to navigate somebody who is going to take advantage of you or harm you. So you've presented a solutions-based way of like, you can trust us and we'll help you out with that. But these people, not everybody is safe and you can't always tell.
Yeah.
I have two questions for you. I love this conversation, by the way. My first question is, do you see a change in the prevalence of certain types of brain as the years go on? Are you seeing more of a certain type, less of a certain type? Is there a correlation there?
Absolutely. So it's always going to be a factor of inputs and where those are coming from sociologically. So an example would be, as COVID has happened, right? More people are homesteading, moving off grid, homeschooling. Here's the problem with that. And I'm not trying to knock people for homeschooling, but there tends to be a cluster of all of that with things like attachment parenting. And as soon as you skew that direction, you're setting your kids up for failure. You're also setting your kids up for failure by not allowing them to struggle in a school type environment. I have so many clients where they're a certain way with their family that is oppositional defiant, right? There's fights breaking out. They won't do anything their parents ask them to do. They won't do chores, etc. But then in school, they're fine. Why is that? Because there's a social compliance aspect to it where they're suddenly able to self-regulate because they know peers might make fun of them. So that's actually a benefit to us. I know we always think of peer pressure as a negative, but there's a lot of aspects of peer pressure that actually serve to help a child that is otherwise oppositional and self-centered realize like, oh shit, this doesn't fly with my peers and I will not have friends if I don't pull it together. But in your family environments, like mom's always going to love me, dad's always going to love me. So you don't ever learn to outgrow it. So I think often kids in homeschool environments, they miss opportunities for social sanctions to help them grow. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I can think of a variety of times in school where I'm like, thank the Lord people corrected some of these behaviors in me by being, not nice about it because I needed to correct them.
Yes.
And my parents weren't going to do it.
Seeing a little bit of that right now. We have a very tight home life, which I love, obviously. But my little one's becoming a little more defiant to my wife and doesn't really seem to care as much about being in trouble at home. But you mentioned getting in trouble with the teachers and she is almost in tears. Like she can tell that's a different kind of in trouble right now. And that we're just kind of like evolving and seeing this now. So it's interesting. You're spot on.
So, and there are ways to blend those two together. So when we work specifically with family systems, we build behavior strategy plans. And one of the things that we have to know is everyone's brain pattern type in the family. So part of what's happening is your wife likely has a brain pattern type that was always going to pull out oppositional defiance in your daughter.
Yep.
And you don't. So it's not necessarily like, what is she doing wrong or what's going wrong? It's There are certain brain pattern types that when they get together, they have something that we call symbiotic dysfunction, where our response to something is exactly the trigger that your brain likes to then re-trigger me. And then it just loops and loops and loops. And the longer we let it loop, the worse it gets. And part of why I want to get this message out there is that won't change unless you change it. So I work with the 80-year-old version that's like, fuck it. I'd rather live 5 years free than spend another day like this. And every day you let this cycle run, it's like a rut in the road that gets deeper and deeper. And when you try to pull out of it, it's harder because you've identified with the pattern as your authentic self for so long that you don't know where it ends and you begin. You've just identified with it as self.
So my second question is actually perfectly in line with what you were just saying. Can you is the goal to change your brain pattern type to another type that is more conducive to your lifestyle now? Or is the goal to change it to what's more natural for the way that you think and the way that, like, what is the goal, and can you change your brain type? I guess that was my question.
I will make sure that we get you guys a visual to put on wherever you put this podcast.
Yes, please.
So you can actually plot all of the brain pattern types onto a spectrum. If you were to visualize the spectrum, which I'll kind of talk the audience through it that's listening to it visually, but I'll make sure to give you a copy of it.
Amazing,
so essentially, each one of us would get plotted on the spectrum. So within these 5 clusters, I said there were subtypes. So imagine that you were to take a spectrum and you would divide into a left half and a right half. And then you were to kind of hash out from the center all the way out to the left, and then hash out from the left all the way out to the right. So what ends up happening is that each one of our brain pattern types would kind of plot us at a very specific hash mark. So it's like knowing your exact GPS coordinate. So what ends up happening is that is your constitutional brain pattern type. Like you will always be that. That will always be your default setting, no matter how much you rewire and heal. Throw sickness your way, some sort of major life event that was unexpected, any sort of perfect storm, what are you going to do? Your brain will just it'll default you, pull you right back there. Because if you're not on your A game, that's where your brain feels safe. So think of this hash mark as your brain's safety setting. Like, this is how I know how to handle my life. Now, what we end up doing through Break Method is we very specifically rewire this pattern so that you're able to have more dynamic range. So it's not about turning you into somebody else. It's showing you right now what's not available to you because your brain is actually constraining your thinking, your choices, your actions. And there's a very chemical component with that. So that strategically and incrementally, you can kind of move yourself closer to the center. This is something that's really important. On our spectrum, you'll see a center circle. So it goes kind of maybe like 10 hash marks out from the center in a circle. When people are plotted there, typically their lives are very boring, very complacent, no risk, no reward, just like vanilla meat and potatoes lives. I almost never see those clients because they don't try to find me in Break Method until some sort of late stage midlife crisis. They suddenly lose a partner, empty nest, right? Some major life event has to happen where they're like, I don't know who I am. And I'm like, yeah, hi, welcome. We can fix that. So people that are in that center circle, their lives are maybe what any of us would describe as boring, monotonous, no risk, no reward, right? They've stayed in the same job forever. They don't like it, but they don't hate it. Everything's like meh. Okay. So all the rest of us are out here, left and right. More volatility, more chaos, but also more enjoyment in life, right? What ends up happening is that we need to move people on the outsides into dynamic range that comes towards center, because for all the rest of us, when we come toward the center, we'll experience peace. But we need to move the people in the center out to the left and right sides because they have way too much of that and they need to mix things up a little bit. So it's more about giving people dynamic range, because most of us, act in such patterned ways that we don't know how to be dynamic with different groups of people, different sort of situations. We're just kind of a one-trick pony, and maybe we mask certain elements, but the underlying mechanisms are the same every time. So what we teach people how to do is actually to respond to different things differently, which you would think makes sense as a human, but our brains, because they're so formulaic, do not like to do this. So you have to train them to do this.
So what does it look like when you have someone that's in that middle category? Because I'm a mentor to somebody who fits that definition. What does it look like? And maybe we don't have to even describe how to do it, but what could they potentially expect if they are moved to the left or the right? Like, how does that manifest for somebody like that? This one guy in particular, like just very plain, just even down to his food, like doesn't really like anything dynamic in his life. He'll tell you, doesn't really enjoy too much of anything. He's just kind of just there, has a job and everything, but could definitely benefit from more dynamics and more enjoyment in his life.
Can I ask you what reason he would have given you for why he sought you out in the first place?
Yes,
and without like outing this person specifically, if you want to dance around it, that's fine.
Sure. We, it's one of the things that we do is we do physical and mental health and toughness essentially, but, kind of rooted around personal development and fitness. So this person initially came to us to get in shape, to put some weight on, to build some more confidence. More physical. Yeah, to build more confidence. And has evolved now over the last year or so into basically, no, I need you to mentor me essentially, because I want just more out of life. I want more enjoyment out of life. And he wasn't raised, I don't believe, with a father, and just kind of raised, I believe, by his grandmother. And
that, by the way, is one of the factors that outputs this brain pattern type that tends to be in the middle.
I had a feeling. Yeah.
The influence of the grandparents or multi-generations, where everyone, like, even if technically you were abandoned by a parent, people step in and overdo it. Typically in the grandparent space. So that's the input. Sense. There's an output for that.
Makes perfect sense. And then I think, we're working on basically building his confidence through his body, and through just enjoying more, and just experiencing new things,
So this guy's issue is likely commitment based. Okay. So confidence, I feel like most people think of confidence wrong. I don't know another way to say it.
Sure.
So most people, if you think about why didn't you do that? A lot of people in our society be like, I just wasn't really feeling that confident about it. Like, I just wasn't really feeling it. But confidence is something that's built really by courage and commitment. And if you're not stepping into something you don't want to do or that scares the shit out of you, and then learning to commit through the hard times, which is, of course, right, that emotional resilience piece, you won't ever become confident. It literally 100%. Is that simple. So this guy could literally work out for a year, get ripped. But if that's not the thing that he's afraid of, he still won't be confident. It won't matter at all. And he'll never move off that center line. So this is a good time to bring up this. So in our society, a lot of us, I think especially in social media, are programmed to radically own our personality, right? Like, radically own that. It's your wound. It's your shadow work. Just own it. Or my family's just like this. I was born in New York City, Jewish family, Upper East Side. Are a lot of us loud and sarcastic? Yeah. But does that mean that I shouldn't have to ever learn to toggle it on and off for the benefit of the group, the audience, myself?
Right.
No. So we have to remember that we've got society kind of functioning in more of like a societal peer pressure way to trick us into actually not even just identifying with our wounded parts, but actually elevating them as some sort of authentic personality, which is total bullshit.
Yeah.
Then let's go a layer deeper. A lot of us believe that if we like something, we should be entitled to do that. Well, this is just what I like, right? So for a second, let's think about intimacy, because this is something I work with couples a lot, and this is something that comes up very frequently. Well, that's how I like it. If you want your marriage to work, learn to fucking not like it at least part of the time,
right?
Because that's how this is going to work. And then maybe on the thing that you don't like, you're going to find out that's actually where the healing and intimacy is, where you just didn't want to be vulnerable, which is why I don't like it. But if you go into it, you're like, oh, I didn't think that I liked that, but now it's brought us so much closer. Totally. So we have to remember that, kind of in line with this, like this idea of authentic personality, we're so driven by preference in our society and our age and time that we're in. what we like to do and we think we want is almost never what we should be doing. So in this guy's case, I think, without getting into the nitty-gritty of his life, so I'm educating, guessing here, most of the things that he avoids that are more like getting out of his comfort zone and figuring out what he really doesn't like to do, those are all the things that I would very specifically incrementally shift. But if you understand this, kind of going back to the visual that I gave you, this kind of like bottom tier of the very physically manifesting behaviors that have a cascade effect, if you understand what he does first, second, third, and fourth, you'll actually know exactly where to put the incremental behavior strategy, because if you understand the sequence, there's a most effective place to put it in.
Yeah.
Rather than, I'll just start at the beginning, because very often you don't want to start at the beginning. And then if somebody has very impulsive anger, you also wouldn't want to put behavior strategy into the impulsive anger, because it happens so quickly that the person doesn't have time to at all process through it. So behavior strategy is something that we have to time based on their cycle. And we also have to time it based on what they most like to avoid, and then scale it really incrementally based on their pattern type. Because different people can handle, just like a medication, different people can handle different doses. And the same is true for neurological rewiring. Is, like for me, somebody could like hit me with the big guns. And because I don't have a commitment problem, I'll be like, if it works, it works. Let's go. But not everybody's like that.
100%. I can't tell you how spot on you are. This is incredible. And I have so many different directions I want to take this. Dude.
Interestingly enough, the commitment piece is what's working for him right now. So after, we spent some time with him in person not too long ago, and we've implemented a commitment piece with him and a couple of the other men that we do, things with. And that's really working for him. And we're seeing, we worked with him for almost 2 years, and we're finally seeing like the shift. So that is definitely spot on.
What have you gotten him to commit to?
It's very little things, but it's commitment with accountability, not just from us. So it's accountability from a group. So
it's committed to consistency.
There's some really key, like, and it might seem like, stupid things to some people, but we had talked about, I talked to him about removing because he has trouble sleep too. And I removed the TV from your room. I've been trying to tell him that for 2 years. And he finally did it a couple days ago. And it was because he watched 2 other guys do it. And then he was like, I'm being held accountable. And he posted, he showed us him doing it. And I was like, holy shit, it's working. Like,
but he's also a fault. I don't mean to talk. I'm sure this guy's wonderful. I'm just going to kind of talk broad strokes here.
Yeah.
This guy's brain pattern type is also somewhat of a follower. Mm-hmm. So that honestly, while it might have had a good side effect for him, what prompted him to do it actually was within his pattern rather than something that actually benefits his pattern.
Oh.
But the other part of this is, think about if this guy's really in the center, consistency is actually not his problem. Because once he does something, he'll stay there forever if it's comfortable.
Gotcha,
so you need to actually mess this guy's whole world up and do it in a way where he can't find the pattern, but you basically require commitment through kind of these like ebbs and flows where he doesn't know what's going to happen, but he's got to stay committed anyways. Yeah. That's the only way this guy's going to radically change.
This is making a lot of sense.
I love that.
I don't know when this episode is going to come out, but at least a month from now, probably. So we'll talk about it now, and we'll have some
commitment to chaos.
Yeah, this will be good. So one of the things that we learned,
you need to like strategically. So the whole thing here is when we're messing up somebody's world to help them, we understand the plan and there is a pattern to it, but it can't be a pattern that they can spot.
Correct.
To them, it has to feel random so that they never know what's coming.
Perfect. Okay. I think this is why we had such a good breakthrough this last week, is because we were all together in person. He lives on the other side of the country, and it was his first time going up a mountain on a hike. It was his first time. There's a couple other things like trying certain kinds of food.
First times for this guy are crucial.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. First time traveling, I believe outside like that and coming into a group environment like this. There's a couple other firsts. Mm-hmm. And as he was, telling this to the group, I was like, I think that's part of it. I think that's why this is starting to work.
And
There's a lot of
specific
firsts.
breaks to his routine are going to
Yeah.
be important.
And there were
So if you
things
guys
he
just
had
say
no
like this
idea.
week, break this part of your routine. And then the next week it's like,
Okay.
put that back. Now break that. Now do this part differently. So that
Awesome.
he never actually gets to sync with something for too long.
Yes.
Because he needs to learn to be dynamic and that he's going to be safe and capable without knowing what's going to come next, right? Because his brain thinks my capability rests solely on knowing what's going to come next, which is why he leads such a repetitive, boring life.
Totally. This is why it worked, because we were together for a week. We do a men's retreat. So we'll just tell you more about it. We do a men's personal development camp, essentially. And nobody knows anything that we're doing until the minute that we do it.
Beautiful.
And there's everything from hiking to cold plunges, sweat lodge. We slaughter and butcher an animal. We do deep emotional work. We fight. We shoot guns. We do a lot of different things, but they have no clue what's happening. We read from the Bible. We do they have no idea, and that's by design. And I think that must be why it worked, because he had no idea what to anticipate, couldn't get ready for it, just had to do it, and you could just see it throughout the whole week for a lot of the men, not just this one guy who is wonderful, by the way, but
And a lot of these guys that are like this, they are super wonderful, sweet, kind, compassionate people.
Mhm.
But maybe they actually need to be a little bit meaner sometimes, right?
Sure.
Like a lot of times we're trying to bring out those parts of them.
Yeah.
Like, you are so nice and sweet and kind. Be a dick.
Like,
Like,
yeah,
how can I bolster you to
Tell some jokes.
Yeah.
be
It
rude.
came out when we were fighting for sure.
yeah,
You could see it in his face. It was awesome.
man, this is so good. Okay, how
And
about
the crazy thing is that really, so with all of your clients, it takes 20 minutes. If you put them through this, I'd be able to teach you how to read the diagnostic so that the entire way that you deal with all of your clients is completely different.
we're totally doing it.
Yeah. That was my third question, was going to ask, do you have a course that I could take or
Yep,
something?
I do. I train people in brain pattern mapping.
Awesome.
So we have 2 levels of it. So we have the brain pattern mapping certification, and then we also have the full practitioner training. So my work is divided into 2 halves. So brain pattern mapping is the diagnostic side. So what is under the hood and what's going on.
Yep.
And then the what do you do about it is the behavior strategy side. So that's the actual process of incremental behavior strategy and rewiring that is very laser focused on that person's pattern. So none of it's general. It's not like generally you treat this person this way. This is exactly what interventions you custom curate for this specific person.
I love it. Okay, let's shift to another topic, because I have a lot I'd like to talk to you about. But one of the ones that talking a lot about men, but this goes for everybody, is addiction. How does addiction set into a brain pattern, and like what are some things that you've seen that could actually help break addiction? Because it seems like an addiction to anything. It could be pills, booze, porn, habits, whatever it is. Some people just cannot shake it, no matter what they do, it seems. And I think we're probably looking at it the wrong way, because you've said so many different things here about how to go about treating this and that. So when it comes to addiction, what do you say about that?
We work with addiction a lot. And I actually just this last September was invited to Johns Hopkins University. Our program was selected for their innovations for substance use disorders. So our technology shows a lot of promise with helping with substance use disorders, because I do believe brain pattern mapping holds a key to effective treatment that's customized. When we look at addiction patterns, I love that you essentially treated them all the same, because in my opinion, they are all the same. Like you said, whether it's porn, heroin, meth, doesn't really matter. If we look at what we described as those kind of 4 markers on the bottom that show that cascading of behaviors, that is going to show us where somebody is inclined toward use of whatever the substance is.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that's important to remember is just, when we were talking about the brain patterns that will correlate to PTSD, some interesting things are actually when someone's life has been softer, easier, maybe both parents were married the whole time, there was a lot of structure, the child didn't build self-efficacy, and they get out into the real world and, they kind of go into fear. What we see is that type is more prone to suicidal ideation, addiction, and PTSD. So that is actually the same cluster. So if you think about in more of a military setting, typically the guys that go into the military because like my daddy was in the military and my grandfather was in the military, but they actually had a good life and they were catered to and they had a doting mom and all of that, right? Maybe there was a little bit of physical discipline, but it was structured so they understood where they were in that family structure. that actually is the recipe for PTSD. When things are actually like rough at home and you like don't really trust your parents, those are the people that don't get PTSD.
That makes so much sense.
So actually, to some extent, and this is why I'm saying like we can screen for this. So it's less about, you actually asked this question early on. Anything can be rewired. I've seen people who have been essentially fired by every therapist they've ever worked with. They've done every modality you could think of. And they basically come to me and they're like, I don't know what this is, but I'm out of options. And I've seen them 180 in 6 months. So I truly believe anybody can rewire. And I don't believe anyone is too broken. But when there's a very specific brain pattern type, which is the cluster we're talking about, where they have that life that we've described, where there's, typically two parents that were married the whole time and all the check marks, essentially the white picket fence, 2.5 kids were met. Yeah. They actually are the ones that data says have the worst outcomes: the suicidal ideation, the cutting, the addiction, and then eventually PTSD, because they're able to safely go up into their heads and they're naturally more self-centered. All the rest of us that had rough childhoods, we couldn't be self-centered because we naturally were worried about other people, keeping other people safe, being situationally aware. Going back to this kind of visual of the source belief spectrum, which is what we call it, right? I said it was divided into left and right sides. The left side, as you move from the center out to the left, every hash mark, situational awareness increases, right? So once you get past that center circle, more and more situational awareness. What can happen if you become so situationally aware that you lose touch with reality? What do you think are some symptoms that could come in tandem with that, which would be that all the way to the left, like far edge?
Paranoid schizophrenia.
Boom.
Hypochondriac, maybe.
Hypochondria. Yeah. Essentially what happens is your hypochondria, actually not as much, because that's more of an internal thing, right? I feel sick, where you're focused on the insides. Situational awareness would be that you're overly focused on your external environment. So more like paranoid schizophrenia, where you think people are watching you, and you essentially, I'll go back to this one too. So as you go from the center to the left, situational awareness is going to increase. The other thing that increases is self-trust. So the people in the center, they're just meh in general. As you move out, more self-trust. What do you think happens when the highest level of self-trust matches with the highest level of situational awareness?
Delusions.
Total delusion, right? Because you can't separate out what's real. You don't have anyone to really check in with because you've probably ostracized everyone in your life and you're not open to feedback. So that's a perfect example of somebody that, within, let's say, 5 hash marks, you could have somebody that's in psychiatric inpatient care with schizophrenia, but you move three hash marks and you have a high level CEO, right? Who maybe one day would have a manic breakdown, which actually does happen a lot, but they're like 3 hash marks apart. Are they really all that different?
I've been there. I've been all the way on that side.
Same brain pattern type.
So what about going the other direction from center to right? What does that mean?
There are actually a couple other things so when we move from the center to the left, we've got increase in situational awareness, increase in self-trust. We also have an increase in workaholism or identifying career as safer than relationship. Okay. So as you move out, typically, right, as you move to the left, work is easy relatively, and relationships, even if you're a committed person, you want to be in them, that is more of your kryptonite. That's where more drama or chaos ensues. And you just, no matter how much you desire for it not to be that way, that's what happens to you.
I'm triggered.
And yes. So now let's go back to the center.
Right now.
So I will say, when you go there, if you were to divide the left half into thirds, that middle third, right in the center, has the absolute highest reported outcomes in life. Most successful, best relationships, self-reported best quality of life. And I mean, this is a total aside, but true biblical child rearing principles actually, as a formula, put you right there. Wow. And I can prove it. So not the legalistic, twisted perspective, but true biblical paradigm teaching gets your kids intentionally into that section. And I believe that God designed that on purpose, which I could give a whole other podcast
I
on.
could totally see
Holy
that.
shit.
So
Yeah,
now
'cause-
let's go center to
I
the
can
right.
totally see that.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. But I can totally see, because in the Bible, like, what are we teaching our kids? We're teaching them truth. We're also teaching them hard lessons.
Mhm.
We're doing things like, just think about, especially the Old Testament, all the bad things that happened,
Yep.
and we're not sugarcoating it. I can totally
And-
see that.
And biblically, you are not to conform to the pattern of the world at all,
Yeah.
which, plot twist, the entire right side of the spectrum is obsessed with. Everything is about what outside feedback says about me. So the
Okay.
left side they have a natural distrust for everybody,
Yeah.
which technically I see as a positive, because if you don't have that, you don't learn discernment, and you either get overcome by the world or harmed by the world, because you don't know the line.
So
Yeah.
the left is the right.
Correct. The left is the right. Yeah.
Okay.
The
Holy
left
shit.
is the right. And actually, you bring up a really good point. And I took on an investor last year, and at one point when we were going into this stuff, he looks at me and he goes, and he's an Orthodox Jew, and he was like, "See, this is why Hashem gave you this, because I would have already exploited it for $1 billion." He was like, "You're like actually protecting this, and you've got good intentions with it." Because what brain pattern mapping does as a technology is you can even predict somebody's political affiliation, because as
Mhm.
much as we think that it's random or it's something that we've chosen, it's not. It's not
Yeah.
at all. It's totally, so what you said is spot on. The left
Wow.
is the right.
Okay. So yeah, tell us about the right side.
So now start at the center, go out to the right. Situational awareness decreases.
Okay.
So every hash mark, it goes down, down, down until you are completely unaware of what's happening around you.
TikTok kid.
Mm-hmm. So another thing that happens is that your self-trust goes down. So every hash mark to the right, your self-trust goes down, and you become fixated on relational interactions. What do they think about me? How do they feel? And unfortunately, they're projecting and assuming what they think others feel.
Yeah.
This actually is what I believe causes many personality disorders, because you're not actually, you're not really operating with objective reality the way the people on the left are. Many of the people on the left, we're actually trying to get to the truth, or we at least believe that truth exists to some point, and we don't believe we're necessarily perfect, but we want to figure it out. The people on the right, actually, as you move toward the right, are more and more sure of what they believe, which is really unfortunate. So like the ones of us on the left, we, to some extent, not when you go all the way to the left, but in that kind of middle range, there's flexibility, because we just want to do what's right, what's efficient. In general, there's a bit of a moral compass. So if we're wrong, we're wrong. When you go to the right, that is not true. That sort of flexibility actually goes down as you fan out to the right.
So it'd be like the difference between the truth and my truth.
Exactly. Exactly that.
Yeah.
Because they can't separate out the two. They are literally, and this is what I try to remind clients all the time, because think about how often people feel hurt. They just hurt me. I'm like, well, what if they have no idea? Like, what if this whole narrative that you've crafted, they've never considered it for a moment?
Right.
Here's a great example. And this really bothers some people, but whatever.
This is why 70% of your clients are men.
Correct. So is everyone familiar with the term stonewalling?
Yeah,
Do you stonewall?
I do.
Do you stonewall?
Probably.
I don't
know.
think so.
I don't know.
I used to before I healed myself. So
Shit.
stonewalling, I think in kind of more like pop psychology, social media therapy speak, is this like toxic behavior where you're shutting people out and you don't care, right? And what's happening is that typically some of the people on the left are the ones that are stonewalling the people on the right, because they have to walk on eggshells, because they don't really understand what they do and say that sets this person off. So your brain is like, better not say anything.
Mhm.
So it's not like
Mm.
typically the person that gets labeled as stonewalling, in their mind, they're like, I just don't want to upset you,
Sure.
you know? So, and then the wife or the husband is upset because it feels like they're shutting them out. But the person that actually is acting out the stonewalling behavior believes that's really the only way to keep the peace.
Yeah.
If I can't actually speak what's on my mind because you get triggered and we can't actually bring this somewhere positive. So more often than not, what ends up happening is that the people that believe their partner is to blame, I've seen 9 times out of 10, once they go through break, they realize that they are actually the problem and they see their partner's behavior from a completely different perspective. Wow. And I have seen so many marriages saved, including clients that have come to me and on their very first appointment, they're like, so a little bit about me. I am recently separated from my narcissistic husband, blah, 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 blah. And typically I let them go through their whole thing. And then I'll typically say to them at the end of the conversation, hey, I just want to throw this out there. There might be a point when you get to module 3 in this work that you want to book an extra call with me because you've had a realization. I'll be here for that. She's like, well, how do I know when? When is it going to be? And I was like, I'm not going to tell you when it's going to be. If it happens, you'll know. You'll know when it happens. Yeah. And almost every time at that exact teaching, I'm getting an email that's like, oh my God, it happened. It's me. They're not a narcissist. I'm the narcissist. And I'm like, yeah, sorry.
This is absolutely fascinating. And I think it's really fascinating how, if you, like we say left and right, we're talking brains, but it's the opposite with politics.
Total opposite. Like a complete inversion.
It's a complete inversion. The left brain is typically the right on the politics. The right brain is the left on when it comes to politics. And to me, it makes perfect sense. Like when you just think of like, this is generalities, not even calling anybody out. Just when you get that kind of mob mentality on the left that cannot look at a truth, no matter how hard the fact is or where it came from. Nope, that must be wrong because I believe this and everyone around me believes this and I refuse to even consider it. That happens a lot, where I think a lot of us on the right are willing to take in new information and be like, shit, I thought it was this. However, I have new information I need to consider. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this person is actually, whatever. That's fascinating.
Self-centeredness also increases as you move to the right. So if you think about it, when you're raised in a childhood home where you are catered to and things are easy, it's a lot easier to be self-centered because you get away with it.
Right.
Change the environment where, and this is why typically only children are more inclined toward the pattern on the right because they can get away with it. As soon as you have other siblings in the mix, my husband is an only child. And when he watches our family interact, he's like, shit, if only I'd had siblings, I wouldn't be like this. Because he's watching like my son and daughter, like they're 3 and 4, physically scrap. They're like taking each other's shit out of their hands. And he's like, I would be so much better off if I just was like, fighting with my sibling and couldn't just get what I wanted all the time.
100%. I have a brother and a sister. So I grew up with the 3. We're all, about 2 years apart or so. But right now my 6-year-old is essentially an only child because my other daughter is 24, like another mom kind of. Yeah. And I joke, elbow my wife all the time, like, see, this is why we need more, but she just, I get it. She doesn't want to have any more. So I'm heavily considering adopting in the next couple of years. I should already have that because I totally see what you're saying. The little one is there and she's very creative and she can, she likes to draw and she makes up stories and all this stuff. But imagine if there was another little boy or a girl that was dragging her to the ground, and like wrestling and fighting over toys. It does a lot of work. It
lets you guys be the good guys so that they still have to endure prolonged hardship that also feels random, right? Because dealing with toddlers is random.
Oh, totally.
You don't ever know, like they're best friends and then River's my best friend, Harley's my best friend. Then all of a sudden there's like someone's throwing a truck at the other person's head. And there's nothing wrong with that. It actually prepares you for life. Right? It builds emotional resilience.
That's so interesting. I'm going to start telling people I'm on the left just to fuck them up.
Like, I'm on the left.
I'm on the left.
Brain patterns.
I'm a lefty.
I'm a lefty.
Well, speaking of politics, what do you see coming, if anything, in terms of, MAHA in brain health and mental health? Because we talked.
If you asked me that a few days ago, I would have said something totally different.
I know. I was just talking with AD. I was just talking with AD before this because if we have somebody on like RFK on, that episode has to air that day because things are going to change within 24 hours for sure. 72 hours later, it's an old story. Nobody cares. So I understand it's kind of a crazy question to ask, but we hear all the time about, gun violence. We need solutions to take away guns. No, we need mental health. No, we need this. No, we need that. And it's like, I feel like a lot of it does come back to addressing the root cause of what's going on in our brains. But is it even worth, thinking like, what could the government potentially put out? Is it as simple as information about what you're talking about, or how can we get what you're talking about out to a larger scale?
Lots of questions there. What's going on right now? I thought things were going well until the Stargate thing. And in general, I try not to immediately react, because who knows what else is going on behind the scenes.
Same.
And I do think that Dave Asprey put out a good post about this, that from a lot of the research he's done, there actually can be some benefits with mRNA. And because in our brains, we're immediately COVID scared and we're like, oh, vaccine. And like, I've been anti-vaccine forever, like way before it was cool.
Yeah.
And so it's not that for me. It's more, I've always been very concerned with AI and the proliferation of AI. And I've always believed that, you know, whether you look at it from a biblical paradigm or you're just looking at it from a multidimensional paradigm, our biggest battle is organic intelligence versus spiritual intelligence. And I just don't think that there's a way around that. So the proliferation of AI scares the shit out of me. I think it should scare everybody, frankly. And if you then blend that with any sort of talk about vaccines, virtually any sci-fi movie you've ever seen immediately comes front and center, and you're like, wait, I thought we were mahaing. So I'm a little concerned about that. But I'm also willing to take a pause and kind of let it play out and see where it goes, because I do think that there's strategy that we're not necessarily aware of, and we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So I don't think it's right to just be like, oh, the whole Maha thing was a sham. It wasn't real. Yeah. So that's how I feel about that piece of it. If you really look at everything that's going on in the world, I think our number one issue is a mental health crisis. And then the mental health crisis spirals into a physical health crisis and so on. I think if we were able to effectively clean up our mental health crisis, we'd live in a very different world. I also think we'd have a very different view in politics. We'd have a different level of awareness of even who we are as spiritual beings and what we're truly capable of. Thus, why I think they've allowed this mental health crisis to persist.
Agreed.
Forever.
What you're talking about, and you know, I know you guys just got I read this on your website maybe about getting that I forgot what you called it, but the addiction for DOD or whatever. It almost scares me to put any of this stuff in the hands of the government at this point.
I'm with you.
You know, because if you can predetermine the things that you can predetermine, because the data is there. I can tell how the way that you talk, and I can tell the way that you explain things. It makes so much sense just knowing everything that I know about neurobiology and epigenetics and all this other stuff. It's like, that's a dystopian, really scary thought that we could just come out and fucking get split. And it's like, nope, you're going to do this and you're going to do this because of this and this, you know what I mean? And it's like, at a certain point, you know, somebody will offer you $1 billion for this, and they're going to be like, yeah, it's for the greater good. And then all of a sudden we don't get a choice of what we do anymore because, well, your brain type says that you're going to be over here.
One of the things that I've always known about the technology that I created and the data that it houses is I have to be extremely careful and discerning with who I ever let touch it, be connected to it, because it actually is the thing that could teach AI to pretend to be human at a level that we would never understand. And that scares the shit out of me. Like, that's the thing that, you know, keeps me up at night, where I'm like, we're helping all these people, but also I cannot ever let, you know, open source AI ever have access to what I've built, because what we have created, it would make AI completely undetectable as non-human.
Yeah.
Because it would know so many levels of shifts and mask and calculations that we would see as just normal human interaction.
Totally. You said a lot of very smart things there. That was a great little rant you had about the government and AI and all that. And one of them, I think a good takeaway for people would be to kind of pause when they see a headline, when they see whatever it is. I'm the same way. When I saw the Stargate thing, I see, you know, everybody that I follow kind of freaking out about it. I'm like, well, this didn't just come up today. They've been thinking about this for a while. Let's just sit back and see. And one of the last things I saw before I came in here was, I didn't get to click on it and read it, Elon bashing it. So I'm like, okay, there's already some sort of big opposition.
Which I actually think is a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that might not make people happy, but I think that's actually
I do too. And that's kind of my point is like, it's everyone's seemingly was like, Stargate is, ruining Maha and all this and that. And it's like, well, let's just hold on a minute. It's literally been 12 hours, like, let's see how this plays out. And who knows? Because a lot of these games are chess and politics. If something comes out saying this and that's what everyone's thinking, that might not actually be what it is. And I'm obviously don't have any inside information, but anyways, I think people can just benefit from not freaking out at every headline and just pausing and waiting and realizing that all these things we see, especially when they're major initiatives, have so much money and power and stuff behind them that it might not just be what we think it is on the surface.
The other thing we have to consider more from a business perspective is if we don't do it, somebody's going to do it. So it's actually more strategic to put the time and resources in it to get there, to potentially lock it down so other people can't use it. So we can't forget that that's definitely a business tactic, is to also just not let your competitor or enemy get there first so that you can control how it's utilized, right? Because a tool can be a weapon. I always tell people like you can twirl your pasta with a fork, or you can stab somebody in the jugular vein with that same fork. It's
fork.
It's still a fork.
Great analogy.
Like I'm pretty opposed to the idea of AI weaponry, but however, everyone on the planet is trying to do it. So we better be the ones to do it and understand it, harness it, and use it to our advantage. Otherwise, somebody else will, and they're going to use it against us.
This is the same advice I give to entrepreneurs all the time. And I know that you mentioned it in my bio, but I've built 8 different companies, all in different sectors. One of the things that I've always lived by is understanding how every single facet of my business works to like a relatively expert level, because how can I hire somebody to go into that role and hold them accountable if I don't know what I'm talking about? So really the same sort of architecture holds for what you're saying. We need to, if our enemy or competitor is going to do it, we have to do it to understand how it works. Otherwise, we're literally just a sitting duck.
And maybe this
then people can take advantage.
Oh, for sure. And maybe this is where we need to, pray a little bit too, because we have no idea what AI is capable of. Obviously, it's on day one of it. We haven't even gotten close to pairing it with quantum computing, which is on the way.
That's what they say. I think in general, what we know of is far behind what's actually real. So I think that's probably not true. It's just true for what they're willing to drip out to us.
I totally agree
human
with you.
beings.
I agree with you. I was in aerospace for a long time, and I worked on a lot of classified programs and worked on things and aspects that people didn't hear about for a long time. So the public is always way behind on what's actually happening, but we're still on like the very first step of this AI thing. And as quantum computing is growing, like imagine 10 years from now, the marriage between those two is going to be infinitely stronger than it is now. We have no idea where that's going to go. So I think that's where this other whole kind of, pull out your logical brain for a minute and put in maybe some more faith that like, hopefully we just go the right way, because there's so many unknowns. It's wild.
This is why one of the, I think, worst travesties that's been done to the human race is to essentially trick us into thinking that we're something like boring and lacking and, gonna die and shrivel up, and that we need AI to be something more than what we are. Right. When the reality is we've intentionally, I think, been hidden from who we really are and what our real gifts are. And I think when you look at even something like the podcast that came out, the telepathy tapes, which these are things that I've been talking about for 15 years, our actual consciousness and what some of us have readily available to us as spiritual gifts, that's actually, I think, what we're all supposed to be able to do. But mental health, physical health, that all gets in the way. Yeah. And one of the things that I've found with Break Method is that when people actually rewire, their spiritual gifts come online. And people that even didn't believe in God, they're like calling me, Bizzie, how come all of a sudden I have access to all this and this? And like, how do I know things before they're going to happen? I'm like, because you're not completely bogged down with your emotional wounds where you're literally like sucked into the feedback of the world. Right. So you can hear clearly. So I really think that if we were able to, this is actually my biggest hope with Maha. There's so much corruption in academia and in regulation that all of the studies and things that we should be focused on, which are understanding our ability to heal ourselves, like frequency healing, sound, our real consciousness, like how come some of us are telepathic? I'm a high functioning savant. everything that I know in mental health was never learned in a book or in school or from anybody. I literally just knew it all from the time I was born. How is that possible? Because it's possible for a lot of us. And we need to be studying those things because that's what should be part of our education. But that's what the system, the global government doesn't want, because then we realize we're powerful and we don't need structures like that. So
that's right. They need us to be reliant on them.
Exactly. And they need us to be mentally unwell to keep manipulating us within this system. So that's my biggest hope, is that we can get something like brain pattern mapping out there to the masses, because the number one thing I hear when people get into our program is this exasperated frustration. Why doesn't everybody know this? Why didn't I learn this in middle school? Because you can literally, what we teach adults in break method, I've done it before, you can distill those down for an educational environment. I've taught it in juvie, I've taught it in the prison, and it works every time. Doesn't matter the academic level of the population, doesn't matter the age. These things should be out there, but they don't want them out there.
Right.
Because then we actually heal and we're free thinkers. And then we actually realize that we have power.
I would love to schedule like 5 more episodes with you.
Let's do it. And like we can go any topic you want.
Oh yeah. I mean,
aliens.
Yeah, that
Jesus,
one right there. I was
demons.
about to say like, okay, well, what might be the higher
what's really
power?
going on with
what
transgenderism?
Is really controlling us? You know, and there's just so many different ways. But I'll ask one more final question for you. Is you kind of mentioned it. You know, we work with a great woman named Katie who does breath work for us. She does one-on-one. She does it at our men's retreats, and everyone has an unbelievable experience every time. And I really do. I know she has some sort of different ability with her brain, soul, I don't know, whatever you might call it. But, you know, there's different people on like kind of like the spectrum of like the left to right brain. You know, some people are just, I don't know, they're bad. They're evil. There's something wrong with them. They don't seem to have a connection or a broken connection with a higher power, or maybe they have a connection to a bad power. I don't know. Then you have people on towards the other end of the spectrum, like Katie, who can basically channel all sorts of things directly about you and your personality, your soul, your childhood, all these different things. So to me, that is showing that there is another power that our brains can do. And some people are here, some people are here, and who knows, there's got to be another completely different level that is probably 10x Katie that I don't even know about. What do you think about that? And
I think if you look at how our body works as a transmitter and receiver, which it ultimately is, how clean is your transmitter receiver? How much mental clutter is there? How much mental chatter is there? One of the things that I can say for sure is when you rewire with something like break method, if you're not actively thinking something, it's quiet. And a lot of people, they're like, wait, what? If I'm not actively trying to think about something, it's just quiet up there. There's no mental chatter. There's no like out loud processing. So whenever I want to tap into a frequency, like a channel to extract information, I can go right there because I'm not distracted. I'm not listening to 10 different frequencies or channels at the same time. Most of us, it would be like trying to listen to 10 of your favorite songs at the same time. You wouldn't be able, you'd hear, it would sound like, if anyone's ever seen the movie Home, I know if you have kids. Did you ever see the movie Home?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Where it's like where aliens invade Earth and they kick everybody out of their apartments, but they say they're moving them to Happy Humans Town.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you have kids, like you have no life. So a lot of times I relate things back to kid movies, but there's this point where he is listening to a human song and he's like, his ears hurt and he's freaking out and he's turning all hot. And then he turns on his music, and to us, it would be like nails on a chalkboard, the worst thing you've ever heard. So when we think about what it would be like to listen to 10 of our favorite songs at the same time, it would just be like the loudest, most indiscernible noise we've ever heard, and it'd probably drive us crazy. That's really how our brains operate all the time. So when you actually rewire, it's like cutting off all 9 so that you're really fully listening to one song, and you've also learned the ability to also turn that song off, which most people can't do. Most people can't actually be quiet.
Right.
And I think right now a lot of people will say meditation is the answer to that, but I'm telling you right now, for a lot of people, meditation is a recipe for actual disaster. That goes in line with that preference thing. The same person that is predisposed towards suicidal ideation, PTSD, addiction, they should tread very lightly and be very careful with what types of meditation they engage in, because that is actually exactly what their brain pattern wants, is to get them lost in their thought process, lost in the visualization. So just a reminder out there, because I feel like people are like, oh, the way to do that is meditation. A lot of people who lean into meditation find that their intrusive thoughts actually ratchet up, not down.
Absolutely. I can totally see that. What is this quote where it's something about the quiet is the devil's playground or something like that?
Well, that's like the mental version of idle hands do the devil's work.
Yeah,
it's
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, being engaged with the right strategy is typically the way to heal, not going on cruise control and trying to do nothing.
Absolutely. This was one of the most fascinating conversations I've ever had. And again, I want to take this in so many different directions for so many different hours.
Yeah.
I'm down. I come to Scottsdale all the time.
Well,
so
please. I mean, let's for real do it again.
We should do a whole parenting episode, because the parenting thing for sure is like 2 hours, and we can really spell it out for people so that because I think ultimately if we want to heal generationally, we have to equip the parents. Otherwise, we're just going to keep repeating the same thing.
Totally. Because as you're explaining that, I'm thinking of my grandparents who, immigrated over here, worked in the coal mines, did all these super hard labor jobs, did all this and that, made my, 5 aunts and uncles and my mother and all this. And then they had kids, and life is becoming so easy. And I have the ability now to give my daughter the easiest life ever. But that's not the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. So that's why I wanted to ask with that.
And competitive sports will help a lot. I don't 100%. Know what, I think in general, when things you naturally have an easier life, right? Like finances are good, happy marriage, all those things. Putting your kid in some sort of highly competitive sport will help agitate in the exact right way, because they might not be as good as the other kids. They're going to have to deal with the different relationship dynamics on the team, like the competitiveness, the physical exertion. That'll do a lot of the input that somebody would need to help push their kid. But you got to do it early. Yeah. I put my kids in competitive soccer at like 3. I lied on their form to get them in, because it's supposed to be 4. I'm like, let's do this now.
Yeah, she's starting right now. We're either going to do karate or jiu-jitsu, but I think jiu-jitsu.
But that's not a team. So
that's a good point.
The only thing, so those are still great.
No, that's a great point.
It's so funny that you said that, because in my head I was like, I was going to address that. And I was like, no, that's obvious. Yeah. But that's typically what people get to first. So that's the right pattern opposition for certain types, but the type that we're talking about has to be a team dynamic.
Soccer.
So soccer, anything like that, because it's less about the sport itself and more about having a coach that might push them in a different way than you do, or have a different personality, having to navigate the other personalities, maybe not getting picked on the first line all the time. Yeah. I coach my son's soccer, and we take it really seriously, and we don't lose at all. And we were in a championship game, and this one woman walks over and she's like, you haven't given my son enough playtime, and his dad's here. And I was like, ma'am, this is a championship game.
Your son sucks.
I met with all of the families in the beginning of the season, and I said, guys, we are old enough now that we either want to win or we want everyone to have a shot. And all the parents are like, no, we want to win. We're like, we live in North Idaho. People are like, well, we're here to win. I'm like, great, let's go. So when it comes time for the championship game, I'm like, ma'am, yes, your son is going to get less time on the field because he is not anywhere near the level of play of all my other players. Yeah. And that's how it's going to be for today. I'm bringing over my husband. I'm like, please, you do that. I'm going to focus on the kids.
This
now.
Is what we're doing.
Yeah,
we're here to win.
This is what we're doing. So something like that, that's important for that kid, whether it hurts his feelings or not. He's now going to have to face the fact that I'm not as good as these other kids. And if I want to get better, I need someone to be honest with me so that I can bridge the gap.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting, because I grew up with two older brothers, and we fought all the time, played all the time, all this stuff, right? And I played football and a handful of other team sports early on, and it didn't help me near as much as when I went into wrestling. And it was...
But you have the opposite type. So what we're talking about is the people that are naturally positioned more toward the right.
Yeah.
They need the team dynamic. Those of us that are on the left, we need the one-on-one, right? Because we've got the relational issues, and they've got the self-trust issues. Yeah. So they need to have the social peer pressure and sanctions of kind of not being good at something or learning how to express themselves better or be more confident. Whereas all of us on the left, we need more of that one-on-one, like a jiu-jitsu, like wrestling, where you're still being observed to be a winner, but it's on a one-on-one.
Yeah. Would you say that
I totally feel that.
a good there's no way you could blanket statement anything in this whole realm, but would you say that a basal generality could be a single or a only child would be more on the right side of the spectrum?
So what ends up happening, there's one question that splits them.
Okay.
And it's if they answer, I felt lonely and isolated, it splits them to the left. And if they answer, I enjoyed being my parents' primary focus, then it splits them to the right. It splits about 80-20. So 80% goes to the right, 20% goes to the left. And what's also interesting is that birth order plays a major role in brain pattern dynamics as well. And what's also really interesting, and for those of us that are listening that have siblings, it's very common that the sibling that gets the most attention is because the parents felt like they needed it because the child was acting out. And then the sibling that felt like they were kind of ignored or left behind to be independent. What ends up happening is that even though they might be mad about that, that input actually puts them to the left and it puts their sibling that acted out that got more attention to the right.
Yeah.
So the outcome of the child who was kind of left behind with parents like, you're fine. Right. Like with me, my parents were like, we just never worried about you. We always knew you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
So they just gave all the focus to my sister. So that's a very common split with siblings. And then there are a variety of other data points that correlate, but definitely birth order plays a role. And there tends to be a leapfrog or skipping effect when you look at families with really large kids or large groupings of siblings.
I totally see that. Well, Bizzie, we're going to have you back. Please, if we have your permission.
Anytime.
We have a lot more to talk about. So we're going to go through the break method for sure.
Yep.
Let's do it.
We don't even have to discuss it. We already know we are.
No, I'm doing it.
We're doing it. So thank you for spending all this time with us. This was absolutely fascinating. And we've talked to a lot of smart people, and we have not come anywhere near touching this. And I think this might be one of the most impactful things that I've ever really thought of, from parenting, from mental health, from society, the country, the direction of the culture, and all these things. So, man, best of luck to you. Keep pushing it out there. Don't let AI get a hold of it.
Never, literally never.
This is amazing. So, wherever someone's listening, they can find your websites and your Instagrams and socials and all that kind of stuff.
breakmethod.com.
Yep, just look below, click. And I'm sure if you're still listening now, you understand how valuable this information is. Please get out there. We need more people to think like this and understand what.
And we'll give you guys a promo code for people that want to get trained in brain pattern mapping or want to just take the program, because we work with clients, so individuals, families, and couples. And then we also obviously train people as practitioners in either brain pattern mapping or the sandwich of the diagnostic and the actual behavior strategy.
Excellent. All right. Well, we will see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
You bet. Cheers.